Welcome to day 193 on the trail. We have four readings for today. From Mark chapter 1 verses 1 through 28, 2 Samuel chapter 10 verses 1 through 19, 1 Chronicles 19 verse 1 through 20 verse 8, and 2 Maccabees chapter 14 verses 37 through 46. Today, in our New Testament reading, we begin our exploration of the Gospel of Mark. Before we start, let's take a brief look at some of the background of this gospel and how it fits into the collection of the four gospels we find in the New Testament. Although Mark is the shortest of the gospels, it is likely the most difficult to understand, and therefore the least read and studied of the four. The first commentary on Mark did not appear until the 6th century AD, and the second another 300 years later. Traditionally, as early as the 2nd century, the gospel was attributed to Peter's companion Mark, as found in 1 Peter 5, verse 13. Then, further connections were made to the Mark found in several of Paul's letters, along with John Mark, who is also mentioned having traveled with Paul in the book of Acts. However, the gospel itself does not identify its author, much less make these connections to other Marks found in the New Testament. In short, we do not know who Mark really was, or where he composed his gospel. The date of the composition of Mark is also difficult to ascertain. Many scholars connect difficulties for the Christian community found in chapter 13 with the Roman Emperor Nero's persecution of Christians in AD 64 and the Jewish revolt of AD 67 through 70. Now, this dating for Mark would also support the theory that the authors of the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, which were written toward the end of the 1st century, had access to Mark's Gospel. For example, 90% of Mark is found in Matthew, and 53% of Mark is found in Luke. Also, since Mark was written so early, it seems that Mark was the first to associate the concept of good news to both the death and resurrection of Jesus and what he had said and done during his ministry. The Greek text of Mark is considered to be cruder and wordier than Matthew and Luke. Also, Mark's Greek is often corrected or improved by the authors of Matthew and Luke. One other literary trait of Mark is that he frequently uses the adverb immediately, which quickens the pace of his narrative. Now, one explanation that is given for Mark's poorer literary construction was that he was collecting stories and oral traditions about Jesus directly and writing them down. However, this criticism is not completely valid. Some of Mark's repetitiveness and randomness may in fact be intended to help with understanding of Mark's core message. For example, in the section contained in Mark chapter 4 verse 35 through chapter 8 verse 27, we find a set of matching stories, or doublets. For example, we have two accounts of Jesus walking on water, and two accounts of the multiplication of bread. Also, the movement in this section goes from a question asked by the disciples in chapter 4, verse 41, which is, "Who is this man?" to a question posed by Jesus to his disciples at the end of the section in chapter 8, verse 29, when Jesus asks, "Who do you say that I am?" Mark also likes to incorporate patterns of three. In chapter 4, verses 3 through 32, we find three seed parables. In chapter 6, three popular opinions about John the Baptist. In chapter 8, three opinions about who Jesus is. We also have three predictions of the Passion, which is the death and resurrection of Jesus. The disciples failed to stay awake 3 times in the Garden of Gethsemane, followed by 3 denials of Jesus by Peter. Now, as we read through Mark's Gospel together, we will pay special attention to this structure of 3. Turning now to chapter 1. Beginning in verse 21, we find the first miracle performed by Jesus. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Just then, there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying out with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching, with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. We first notice that the man is not at the center of the story. He is mainly the carrier of the unclean spirit. We do not know how he gets into the synagogue or if he is there already. And Jesus does not address him directly. Instead, Jesus speaks to the unclean spirit. And then, after the exorcism, the man is not mentioned at all. But immediately, we notice three statements made by the demons. "What have you to do with us? Have you come to destroy us? And I know who you are, the Holy One of God." The demons are speaking the truth. They know who Jesus is and where they stand. They know that they can be destroyed by Jesus. So why does Jesus silence them? Again, they did not say anything that was untrue. I believe the answer here goes to their credibility. Jesus does not need, nor does he want, an endorsement from demons. After all, they knew who he was, but that knowledge does not affect what they do or how they act. So their confession is really worthless. In the same way, this interaction forces us to ask, would Jesus be proud of our witness? If we tell people that we know who Jesus is, the Holy One of God, would he tell us to be silent based on the way we act or how we live? Does our confession match our words? We find a similar warning from Jesus on the importance of our confession matching our actions in Luke chapter 6. "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I tell you? I will show you what someone is like who comes to me, hears my words, and acts on them. That one is like a man building a house, who dug deeply and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood arose, the river burst against that house, but could not shake it, because it had been well built. But the one who hears and does not act is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the river burst against it, immediately it fell, and great was the ruin of that house." Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.